world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
We are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Sunday, October 19th, as you're listening to this, and it is the day after the No Kings protest. Now, with the No Kings, everything went off relatively smoothly. There were no arrests that I'm aware of, anywhere in the country. There might have been a few, but nothing major that has been reported or picked up by any of the major news outlets. And you would think that if there were major charges coming from anything somewhere during the No Kings, that at least right-wing media would have been picking up on it and, running with that kind of story and, really raking the No Kings protest through the mud. But it went off, pretty much without a hitch. We had 7 to 10 million people at minimum out there protesting everything that was going on in this administration, with the fact that, this president thinks himself a king. He thinks he should be able to rule with royal proclamation, and that he should just get to do whatever he wants. He tries to fire people who disagree with him. And he wants to put pressure on people to do the things he wants. He thinks his political enemies deserve to be arrested and charged with crimes, regardless of if there's any information or any proof that they committed any wrongdoing. That the things he says should just happen. And even though the courts are stepping in and saying, no, that's not how that works. No, you can't do this. No, you can't do that, etc. Donald Trump wants to be a king so badly that he wants to be able to do whatever he wants to do, and he doesn't understand the pushback here. Now, Republicans leading up to the No Kings protest have been trying to spin it as some kind of a left-leaning, violent Antifa rally, but no violence happened. Antifa isn't a group. It's not an organized thing, not like the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers, Patriot Front, any of those groups. It is an ideology. Antifa literally stands for anti-fascism or anti-fascist. And that means if you are against Antifa, does that make you pro-fascist? Well, that would logically be the way that would go. And we've been against fascist and fascism for a long time. We fought against it in World War II. But these Republicans throw out talking points like that just because they can throw these words around and they can rile people up, and they have been great at getting messaging out and convincing people that something is something it's not. So they have convinced some of their supporters that Antifa is this boogeyman, this horrible group, and that it is nothing but violent agitators, etc. When the whole thing is we are standing up against fascist ideologies. And we used to fight against those fascist ideologies. And if other countries were doing the things we're trying to do here, at least the Republicans are, we'd fight against that in other countries, and we would say how horrible it is that they're trying to do those things. For example, having the Pentagon say, well, you have to agree to not publish any stories if you're a member of the press that we disagree with. Well, that is not something that the freedom of the press allows for. Like it or not, we have the freedom of press in this country because we know and we learned during the American Revolution how important it is to be able to print whatever needs to be printed in the media. Because during the Revolution, anything that was against the crown, against the king, was stifled, and you couldn't print those things. You can't control the media like that. So we know the freedom of the press is that important, and we can't stifle that here. But the Pentagon is trying to say, well, you can only publish things we approve of. And now they're trying to say, well, it was because of national security, because, well, you shouldn't be publishing something about classified information without clearance. Well, then don't tell them things that are classified. Oh, but wait, there was that Signal chat that Pete Hegseth and others were involved in where they were leaking classified information and they were talking about it on an unsecure app. So maybe the press isn't the problem. Maybe it is this administration and their use of unsecure services and things like that. But no kings went off without a hitch. 7 to 10 million people at minimum were out protesting. I've seen some of the videos, people in inflatables and, just standing there holding signs and cheering and music playing and all of those things. It looked like it was a great protest. Now, I was not able to go. I was one of the ones that had to go work today. But one of the Republican talking points that you're going to see is, well, it's called a job. Why don't you go get one of those, lazy Democrats not doing any work? The protest was held on a Saturday. A lot of people don't work Saturdays. There are still a lot of businesses that don't work weekends. And that's the difference. Now, if you look at something like January 6th, where thousands of people stormed the Capitol and did all of that damage, that was on a Wednesday. So what does that tell you? But that's their talking point. They want to try to make something into something it's not, that, oh, Democrats are just lazy and they're not out working and they're not doing anything to bolster the economy. They'd rather stand there and protest and call, of course, they'll call us snowflakes and do things like that. The whole thing is ridiculous. But the No Kings protest was great from what we can see going on. Now, there was a story going on with No Kings I talked about yesterday, that they were talking about doing a live fire exercise in Southern California at Camp Pendleton, where they were going to be firing munitions. And they were talking about whether or not they were going to close I-5. Well, they did end up having to close I-5 for about 5 hours today, last minute, because of this live fire exercise. Now, it sounds like that did go off the way they intended, with no collateral damage or anything like that. And this was just a show of force by this administration, trying to show what they could do. Now, they claim it has to do with the Marine Corps 250th birthday. But I really don't know if I buy that. I think this was more of them trying to just say, look at how tough we are. We're going to distract from the No Kings protest. We're going to show you exactly what's going on. And what the military can do. And it landed like a dud. I mean, they did their little thing, caused traffic backups and things like that. They disrupted things, but it didn't actually quell any of the protests that were going on around the nation. People still showed up and they still peacefully protested everything going on with this administration. And them doing this was not a big distraction like they were trying to make it out to be. So, once again, this administration tries to do something and they fail. They tried to intimidate the American people. They fail. They try to fund the government right now. They fail. They've tried to spin this narrative about how it's the Democratic shutdown. They fail at that. They try to eliminate a bunch of these government programs. The courts say no. Everything they have tried to do, for the most part, they have failed at. I'm not surprised that this is no different. Them trying to do this I-5 shutdown, where they shut down the road to do live fire over it and stuff. I'm just surprised that, from what I am reading, there was no collateral damage. This could have gone horribly, and it could have ended up, getting a lot of people hurt, for the simple fact that we were live firing munitions over populated parts of California. Then the fact that we are even talking about them doing that in this day and age is ridiculous. If you would have told me that this was a plot point for some dystopian movie that they were doing about how bad a president was prior to this administration, I wouldn't have believed it. I would have thought it was a little too far out there that no president would ever sign off on them doing something like this. But here we are, and we've actually attempted it. We've actually done it. And I just don't understand how far this is going to go before the Republican Party realizes that this whole administration is nothing but a joke and they will have to move away from him. And maybe this No Kings protest is going to be the beginnings of the Republican Party going, oh, we need to do something here because these protests are only getting bigger and we need to worry about getting reelected. And backing Donald Trump is not getting us there. So it's entirely possible that this may start those discussions within the Republican Party. Although I have been saying I think those discussions maybe are already happening behind closed doors, at least whispering and stuff saying, okay, where do we break? When do we break? When do we worry about getting reelected? And things like that. So we will have to see how the Republicans start to respond after No Kings. And if they end up going against Donald Trump in the near future because of No Kings. All right. Now, yesterday, if you might remember that I talked about TikTok and how I had a couple of videos taken down because of community guidelines violations. And I had said at the time that they were up on YouTube and on Spotify. And I thought I had already got them posted on YouTube and Spotify before they were taken down by TikTok. And apparently that wasn't the case. So they are up over on YouTube and Spotify now. I encourage you to check them out. I did win my appeals, and those videos got put back up, but TikTok is still fucking around, and they're suppressing my content because those two videos, even now 8 or 10 hours after I won my appeal, had only a couple hundred views at best on them. They weren't getting pushed like they should have been, but they are restored. I have now won all of my appeals, and the only time I have ever lost an appeal with TikTok was one comment I made talking about what Republicans think of transgender women. And I was trying to make a point, and I said, well, Republicans believe that all trans women are like Maxwell Klinger from MASH. And if you are a younger person and you are not familiar with MASH, I encourage you to check it out. It is actually a really good show. For those older people in the audience like myself who know who Klinger is, you'll get the reference. But if you don't know who I'm talking about, MASH is a show set in the Korean War, and Maxwell Klinger is trying to do anything to get out of being in the army. He doesn't want to be in Korea. He doesn't want to be in the army. So his brilliant idea to get out is he's constantly wearing dresses and women's clothes, trying to get people to believe that he's actually a woman, that he thinks he's a woman, and that he would get out on a psychological discharge. Except nobody believes him because one, he's literally not doing anything different than he would have been doing wearing any other clothes. He's just showing up in dresses. And they don't buy it. It's played for laughs. And I have said that I think that a lot of Republicans think trans women are nothing but people like Corporal Klinger, that they don't actually believe it. They're just doing it for whatever reason. They don't understand what is going on with people who have gender dysmorphia, etc., who are trans. And that is the only comment that I lost the appeal on, and I don't even know why they didn't appeal it, but whatever. That is the only time I've ever lost an appeal with TikTok. And so far with the new community guidelines that have come out, I heard that they were going to be hitting you with guidelines for all of your videos, and they were going to go back in time. None of my videos have ever gotten taken down because of that. These were the only two, and then they immediately will get put back up on appeal. I'm guessing some Republicans saw it, hit me with a report right off the bat as soon as they saw it, because they didn't like what I was saying. One of them was talking about the No Kings protest. One was talking about Speaker of the House Mike Johnson and him telling Representative Grijalva. She needs to get to work, even though he refuses to swear her in. But those videos are now both up on TikTok, and now they have been put up on Spotify and YouTube as well. Speaking of Representative Grijalva, she still does not have access to her budget. Even though Mike Johnson says she has hired some staffers, that is the only place I am finding that confirmed that she has actually hired staffers. She doesn't have access to computers, doesn't have access to email, doesn't have working phone lines or anything because she is not considered a member of Congress because he refuses to swear her in. And I don't know if anybody else can swear her in unless it is somebody designated by Mike Johnson to run the chamber when he is not there. He has, for the most part, been the one to gavel in and gavel out to make sure that they keep the House of Representatives out of session so they don't conduct any business, despite the fact that Democrats are showing up during the shutdown. Democrats are showing up wanting to work, wanting to negotiate. Mike Johnson's not there to negotiate. He just keeps telling Democrats, we'll open the government back up, I'll swear her in. And he is trying to prevent a vote on the discharge petition for the Epstein files. Now, we talk about it a lot, but the truth of the matter is they don't want the Epstein files released because no matter which way they vote on this Epstein discharge petition, it is going to be bad for the Republican Party, at least elected Republicans. Why? Well, if they vote to keep the files hidden, their voters, who have been told for years by people like Donald Trump and other MAGA Republicans that Democrats do all these awful things involving children, that they don't understand why Republicans aren't releasing the files, because they want their proof that the Democrats are doing all of these awful things with children, etc. And then you have Donald Trump and other high-profile Republicans that may be on the list, and some people are suggesting Mike Johnson may also be on the list, and that they need to keep the files hidden because they don't want to expose their own criminality. So with that, they can't win on this discharge petition, and they only need one more signature to force a vote of that discharge petition. And that would be Representative Grijalva when she gets elected. Now, she's been elected. She needs to be sworn in. Mike Johnson needs to do his job and bring her into the House of Representatives so she can represent her district, so she can actually get to work like he is trying to tell her to do. The fact that he is delaying all of this is not good. Now, I just hope the Democrats have the same resolve to do something like that to a Republican when they're back in charge. If there's a special election, maybe they hold a Republican seat out hostage for a while and just see what the Republicans do. They would lose their minds if a Democrat treated them like this. But there's no outcry from the Republican Party about this, about swearing her in yet. What they should do, and I've talked about this in other podcasts, is one more member of the Republican Party should just sign the discharge petition to go ahead and release the files to force that vote and then vote against it just to get her sworn in. Because if they had any foresight, they would realize Democrats could play these same games. They are banking on the fact that Democrats don't play dirty like that they do like Michelle Obama you said, which is when they go low, we go high. And taking that class act high road is not working anymore. We can't continue to play the moral high ground here. We need to get down in the mud, fight them on their level, and play by the dirty tricks they're doing. So if something happens after the midterms and Donald Trump gets another pick for the Supreme Court and we have control of the Senate, hold it ransom. Say it's too close to the election. Pull a Mitch McConnell. I don't know if Chuck Schumer would have the resolve to do something like that, but we should. We should do things like that and treat them the way they treat Democrats and see what happens. They would lose their minds. But when it happens to them, they think it's the worst thing ever. They're being persecuted. But when they do it to other people, oh, it's perfectly fine and it's okay. Now, we are in uh, day 19 of this government shutdown, and there doesn't appear to be any end in sight. The next vote for anything related to the government shutdown is set for Tuesday, I believe. That would already make it the third longest shutdown in U.S. history, and they're not negotiating right now. And I've talked about it before, but if they were serious about negotiating here, Democrats have said they want to restore all $1 trillion that was cut from Medicaid, and that was $1 trillion over 10 years. But they want to restore all that funding, and they want to extend the Affordable Care Act subsidies indefinitely. Now, if Republicans were serious about negotiating, one, the House of Representatives would be in session, and Representative Grijalva would be sworn in. But beyond that, they would show up and they would say, okay, well, we can't do indefinite on the Affordable Care Act subsidies. We are going to do, we can give you 3 years, we can give you 5 or something. There'd be a starting point held in good faith with the backing of Speaker Johnson, and they would be able to start there. And then Democrats would come back with a counterpoint of, well, you said you could only do 3 years or 5 years, whatever. Well, we want 15. And they would keep going back and forth and meet in the middle somewhere. And then they'd start on the $1 trillion Medicaid cuts. And maybe they extend the cuts to not start till 2029. And they reduce it by half or something. Ultimately, they would go back and forth until they find a middle ground. But neither side is giving anything because Democrats have said this is what we want, and they were waiting for that first counteroffer from Republicans. But the Republican counteroffer right now is, nope, we're not going to even talk about any of that. Vote to open the government, and then we will discuss that at a later point. And Democrats are saying there's no later left. For the Affordable Care Act subsidies, they have to be dealt with by the end of the year when they expire. That's about 10 weeks away. Well, when they expire, people's health care is going to go up, and Republicans don't seem to care about that. Republicans just don't care that people's health care is going to go up. Now, without those subsidies, people that get their insurance through the Affordable Care Act, they know their policies are going to be more expensive. But that's what Republicans want. They want the Affordable Care Act to become unsustainable because then it becomes unpopular, and then they can hope to end up ultimately being able to repeal or replace it, which they can't do right now because it is popular. People like it, and they know people like it because you hear people talk about it. They hate Obamacare, but they love their insurance through the Affordable Care Act because now insurance is semi-affordable. And I know there's other problems with healthcare here in the United States, but it is still better than it was before the Affordable Care Act. There's a long way to go to fix healthcare in the United States. But breaking the Affordable Care Act is not the way to go about fixing healthcare, especially when they don't seem to have any sort of a plan to actually replace it. Remember, Donald Trump, when asked about it during this election, during the debate, he said he had concepts of a plan for healthcare. But during his first administration, he kept saying his healthcare plan was coming in 2 weeks. At one point, he did a big interview, and he comes out with a big binder full of his healthcare plan. Turns out it was all blank. It was a prop for show. They never had a plan to replace Obamacare, but they wanted you to believe there was something there and they were going to replace it. And it was always 2 weeks away. And we're in that same boat now. They want to get rid of Obamacare. They want to get rid of the Affordable Care Act with no plan to replace it, with no idea on how to fix it. They just want it to go away, which would make insurance companies a lot more money. And once you make the insurance companies more money, that does not make healthcare more affordable for anybody else. All right. So, with this No Kings protest today, Donald Trump reacted about like you would expect. He went golfing. At least that's what I heard. I heard he was out on the golf course. He didn't really respond too much with it, but he did repost some things on his Truth Social page. And one of the things he reposted was an AI image of him getting into a King Trump jet and dumping brown liquid on protesters. Now, I'm not going to venture a guess as to what that was supposed to actually be for the brown liquid. You can draw your own conclusions from that. But the fact that he was getting into a King Trump jet is the point of No Kings. Donald Trump believes he is a king, and when he shares things like that, and he shares images of people that may used AI to generate images of him in a crown and a robe with a scepter, and he had his NFTs where he looks like a superhero and a king and all those things. Donald Trump believes that is what he really is. And if this was a Democrat doing those kind of things, Republicans would be losing their minds. That's a typical Republican strategy. They don't like the things that they do when they're done against them, but if they are doing it to the people they don't like, oh, it's so great. Now, this whole Trump sharing AI messages isn't anything new. Donald Trump, I don't even know if he actually watches the stuff he shares or if he just thinks it looks favorable to him, so he just reposts it and calls it good. But Donald Trump misses the point yet again when it comes to stuff like this. He only cares about how his image looks and making himself look good. So if he's sharing these kind of things, he thinks this makes him look good. It makes him a joke, realistically. We are a joke in the eyes of the world because he is our president. They don't take him seriously, and they would take him even less seriously after he shares images like that. That is not something a president should do or how a president should act. But Donald Trump is constantly pushing those barriers because he's an outsider. And that's what his supporters seem to think. They like the fact that he's this outsider, that he's not a politician, he's not prim and proper and doing things like that. But the simple fact of the matter is, he's an uneducated fool. Okay? He's a court jester. He speaks at about a fifth to sixth grade level, and he doesn't use big words. He doesn't talk down to them. And they cheer him for it. I don't even think half the time they pay attention to exactly what he's saying. It's the simple fact that he is talking that they are cheering for. Because I've seen videos of people who have said, well, Biden said this, and then they read a Donald Trump quote and they get so pissed off about the thing Joe Biden supposedly said, or that they say, well, Joe Biden tried to do X, Y, or Z, and they get mad because they don't think we should be doing it or whatever until they find out Donald Trump said it, and then they have to back up what he's doing. So Donald Trump is, his reaction today is probably going to be, more angry about the No Kings now that he's had a chance. I have not seen his early morning True Social posts yet, but he's up in the middle of the night and he's constantly posting on True Social and things when he's awake in the middle of the night, which is a potential sign of dementia. Not being able to control your body's natural rhythm, sleeping at random times, random hours of the day, being awake all night. Those are signs of dementia. And Donald Trump is not a young person. He is 79 years old, and he is, clearly going through some things mentally, and they're clearly propping him up. I mean, I just did a video talking about it the other day, talking about how he was giving this press conference, and then he was complaining about having to stand because, oh, well, I stood for an hour and a half yesterday, and now I'm standing again today. And do you think I should sit down? Maybe I should sit down. Oh, I've been standing too long. And then he ends up plopping down in a chair while everybody else is standing around him. And this is not the guy who wants us to believe that he is the peak of physical perfection and he is as healthy as he was 20 years ago, etc. He is aging and deteriorating right before our eyes. Now, the New York GOP, the New York State GOP, has reacted to this young Republican's story. And I talked about it the other day about how there was this group chat, and it wasn't just in one state. There were group chats using Telegram all around the country of these young Republicans. And they were sharing all kinds of pro-Hitler messaging and white supremacist messaging, talking about using gas chambers to go after their enemies and getting rid of their enemies and all of this stuff. And it was vile and horrific things. And this was done by the future leaders of the Republican Party. And of course, J.D. Vance reacted to it by saying, well, they're just kids and boys will be boys. And I would talk to my kids and tell them to be careful about what they post in group chats and on the internet. Again, not telling them that they shouldn't be thinking like that or that their thinking is wrong, but be careful who you post it or where you post and where you say things like that, because it can be leaked. Again, having problems with the leaker, not the message itself. Well, the New York GOP has responded to this story, and what they have done is they have disbanded the New York chapter of the Young Republicans. And that is actually the correct response here. The GOP itself should be, removing anybody from contention for anything GOP related and getting them out of their party for being connected to it. But for the most part, you are hearing crickets when it comes to the Republican Party, or like I said with JD Vance, it's being defended as, well, boys will be boys and kids will be kids. And, we got to talk to these kids about, what they're doing. Except they are talking about people that are, anywhere from 18 to mid 30s and calling them kids. And that's a little ridiculous there, especially in this context. They want to treat them like they just get some kind of special treatment, and that you should just say, oh, well, it's okay. People make mistakes. No, when you are posting those kind of vile things in group chats, clearly you agree with it. You are participating. That is the problem here. And again, a lot of the GOP doesn't have a problem with what was being said, but the fact that it was leaked. And that is what this GOP has gotten to at this point. They care more about who leaked the material than what was in it. Remember, they launched a huge investigation, and we never found out who actually leaked the Roe v. Wade decision to the general public. But they were more concerned with who leaked it rather than what the decision was and how they were going to overturn Roe v. Wade. When most of us were looking at it going, oh my God, they are going to overturn Roe v. Wade, and looking at what they actually said in it. And part of that decision is where Justice Amy Coney Barrett had said the stock of white babies that were up for adoption was relatively low. And how horrific hearing that being phrased that way should actually be. No, they didn't care about any of that. They only cared about the fact that it was leaked out to the media. So that is a problem with this Republican Party. They only care about the leaker, not necessarily the substance of what was being leaked. Now, with this government shutdown, Marjorie Taylor Greene has kind of sounded like a voice of reason on some topics. She has said that we need to do something about the Affordable Care Act subsidies, that yes, we need to deal with it, because she even said her kids' insurance is going to double without the Affordable Care Act subsidies being in place. And when Marjorie Taylor Greene is sounding like the voice of reason, that should be a warning bell for your party that, maybe you're doing something wrong. If she is the one saying, hey, we got to do something different here. This isn't working. Let's actually, negotiate at some point, and let's open the government back up. Now, she stopped short of agreeing with Democrats and saying, okay, let's fund this. And, she's still on the side of let's open the government at first, and then we'll have those discussions. But she actually wants to do something to fix healthcare. But then she has to end up going back and still being herself and coming up with some wackadoodle conspiracy theory. And, she came out and she said on either Truth Social or Twitter that, well, it's a great day with this government shutdown because now it's nothing but clear skies as we have shut down the Democrat weather control programs that were government funded. And we're not going to be doing any sort of government funded weather control stuff anymore. But we never were doing any government controlled weather control things. There is no apparatus to control the weather. The problem with the weather is that climate change is real. But they don't want to admit climate change is real, that we've actually done things to harm the environment, like burning fossil fuels, things like that, that we could do things like supporting green energy and actually reverse the damages done to the environment. But no, instead, Marjorie Taylor Greene wants you to believe that we are doing some kind of government controlled weather control, which is completely and totally ridiculous. But this is also coming from the same woman who said that California wildfires were started by Jewish space lasers. So take that with a grain of salt. But Marjorie Taylor Greene, being the voice of reason for the Republican Party when it comes to actually negotiating on the health care, should be a wake-up call to the rest of their party about what they need to do and how they need to come together and actually negotiate. They need to get this done. Come and quit listening to Donald Trump, because you're not actually winning this government shutdown fight. And they need to negotiate something to fix our problem with healthcare. And by not funding the Affordable Care Act subsidies, and by cutting Medicaid, is not how we are going to fix healthcare. It's going to break it, and that's what they want. They want it broken. All right. So Donald Trump took to Truth Social, and he shined a spotlight on Representative Massey. And he is calling Massey a rhino and a traitor to Donald Trump and all of these things. Why? Well, because Representative Massey is the one who launched the discharge petition to release the Epstein files. We talked about that a little bit ago, talking about Representative Grijalva. Now, they do not want the Epstein files released, and Donald Trump in particular does not want the Epstein files released. He wants people to forget that he knew Jeffrey Epstein, which is funny because back in the 90s and early 2000s, when Epstein was considered a big-time player in, the financial world, etc., when he was popular, at least popular in certain circles, Donald Trump wanted everyone to know that they were friends and that they knew each other, because he was riding that popularity to help his own image, etc. And now that it's known what a creep Epstein was and all of the horrible things Epstein did, Donald Trump, ever being the showman and ever being the guy to worry about his own appearance, knows that if he keeps up this appearance of knowing Epstein or being friends, that it's going to hurt his reputation. So he wants this whole thing to go away. And now he's going after the representative that wants to put that discharge petition out there. That's why only 4 Republicans so far have signed off on releasing the Epstein files. Now, it was Massey, it was Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and I forget who the last one was. But the rest of the Republican Party is afraid of Donald Trump doing to them what he has done to Representative Massey by dragging him through the mud and trying to paint him out as something he's not. The Republicans are still losing their minds, or at least right-wingers are losing their minds, maybe MAGA, depending on how you want to look at it, over Bad Bunny being selected to play the Super Bowl halftime show. Now, we are hearing that Charlie Kirk's foundation, Turning Point USA, is going to be putting on their own version of a halftime show, I believe, on their website. And that they're probably going to get Lee Greenwood and maybe somebody else to do some kind of a show. I think Laura Trump, Donald Trump's daughter-in-law, has suggested maybe she might sing at this event. The whole thing's a joke. But now apparently there's another petition going around to replace Bad Bunny at the halftime show. It's gotten a little bit of traction, like 30-some thousand signatures. And they want to replace Bad Bunny, who is a very popular artist right now with current releases, with George Strait. George Strait, who is in his 70s. And while I love country music and I love George Strait, he hasn't been, culturally popular in 15, 20 years. He's not a big name right now. But that's what they want. They want to go back to somebody that they can claim is an American, despite the fact that Bad Bunny is an American born in Puerto Rico. They don't care about that, or they don't care that he is an American citizen. It's the simple fact that he's Puerto Rican, that he does his show in Spanish and everything. They want to look at their artist for the halftime show and be like, yeah, it, it's an all American. It's white supremacy is what it is. They want somebody who they identify with, and they don't identify with Bad Bunny. Now, ultimately, do I think this goes anywhere? No. Do I think they're going to be successful in changing the artist for the halftime show? No. They're just going to have to learn to suck it up and deal with it and move on. But they're the ones who like to tell us that, we're the snowflakes and we have to have things our way and blah, blah, blah. But they're the ones throwing a fit over who's performing at the halftime show. But this is also the same group that was protesting the NFL years ago over Colin Kaepernick taking a knee during the national anthem to protest systemic racism and things like that. They were mad about that. They always seem to have some kind of an outrage over the NFL anyway. And now they're just wanting something to be mad about with this halftime show, bad enough that they're trying to say that they're going to do their own show or that the NFL needs to cave. And it's not working. They think they have the same kind of pressure like the people on the left did when it comes to like Jimmy Kimmel. But there's a big difference here between the halftime show of the Super Bowl and what happened with Jimmy Kimmel. First of all, the halftime show of the Super Bowl was selected by a private company, the NFL. They are, for all intents and purposes, a company. They are, not a media outlet like ABC. And there wasn't pressure from a government-controlled entity like the FCC that pressured ABC to drop Kimmel in exchange for not going after their licensing, etc. And that is the big difference. But Republicans and MAGA specifically, they don't look at context. They don't look at difference. They don't look at nuance or anything like that. They want to try to draw these false equivalencies. And that is just not the case here. They're not the same thing at all. The FCC was trying to pressure ABC to drop Kimmel because he said some things that Donald Trump didn't like and that made Donald Trump look bad. The problem is all Jimmy Kimmel really did was point out Donald Trump's own words. And for those of you that might have forgotten what happened, this was right after Charlie Kirk had been assassinated or shot or whatever term you want to use there. Donald Trump was asked by a reporter how he was holding up after his friend, Charlie Kirk, had been killed. And he goes, I think I'm holding up pretty well. Oh, by the way, look at my new ballroom. Isn't it great? They've begun construction on it. And all Jimmy Kimmel was pointed out was that, well, clearly Donald Trump has moved on to the fourth stage of grief, construction. It's a joke. He was pointing out what Donald Trump had just said. Donald Trump didn't seem bothered by the fact that Charlie Kirk was gone and moved on to pointing out something that he was trying to accomplish. It wasn't a thing, but Donald Trump took it as a personal insult, as a slight, because he's very thin-skinned. He is a narcissist. He only cares about his appearance, and those jokes made him look bad. So Donald Trump reacted, got his FCC chairman to go after ABC, and that is the difference here. Now, if they try to do something like that with the NFL and try to force the NFL to change their artist, then people on the left would be reacting the same way as they did with Jimmy Kimmel. But that's not what's going on here at this point. There was no pressure campaign by anybody on the left to force the NFL to select Bad Bunny or anything like that. They picked somebody who is right now one of the hottest artists and went with it, which isn't always a bad thing. One of the problems they used to have with the Super Bowl is a lot of years it seemed like they went with older acts that didn't appeal to a younger audience. Well, now they're going toward more of a younger audience because they're going to somebody who's modern and popular. That's not a bad thing, but Republicans sure seem to think it is, in part because of who it is. Because it's somebody who's Puerto Rican, somebody who does his show mostly in Spanish, and they are losing their minds over it. The one thing that may end up causing the Republicans to end up negotiating here on this government shutdown is the fact that November 1st is coming. Now, what is November 1st? Well, November 1st would be the beginning of a new month, and SNAP benefits would be going out to American citizens that receive those benefits. And for those of you that don't know, SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, is the replacement acronym for food stamps. And when those funds don't go out, there are going to be large sections of this country, especially in red rural areas, that rely on their food stamps or SNAP benefits to be able to eat, that they're not going to be getting access to food. And that may be enough to cause some Republicans to say, okay, we need to do something here and actually act. Now, this comes as, of course, we're dealing with the government shutdown, but Democrats aren't budging. Now, it's not that Democrats don't want people to have access to their food stamp benefits. Of course they do. But until they fund the government, they may not be able to get those benefits. And that may put some pressure on Republicans. But then again, Republicans have always railed against those programs, and they like to use stories, and they make up ideas. This goes all the way back to the Reagan era, where they would talk about people living it up on the high life, on food stamps and welfare benefits, etc. And of course, there's always a fictitious person involved that is making a fortune and a living on their food stamps. And are there people who do take advantage of the system? Of course. That unfortunately that does happen when it comes to any government assistance program like that. There's always going to be somebody who takes full advantage when they shouldn't. But overall, those cases are few and far in between. But Republicans want you to believe that that's the norm. When it comes to people on food stamp benefits, et cetera, that they're not actually eating the food, that they're selling it for, cash so they can go buy, illicit substances or alcohol or something like that, cigarettes, whatever. And things like that have gone on for years, but it's again a very small percentage of the total people who are on those assistance programs. But as we are dealing with November coming up and we are dealing with, Thanksgiving next month, there is a very real possibility that no benefits go out until the government opens back up because there's been no funds appropriated for this. And that might be something maybe one side or the other may try to use as leverage to get to a point where they are having discussions about the government shutdown and trying to reopen the government. It's just something we're going to have to watch and see if that actually makes any difference for anybody. Now, some states that do have enough money may be able to just offset it and they shift funds around on the state level and cover the offset until that government money comes in. But there are other states where they get more back than what they pay in federal taxes, where they need that federal tax money to offset what they are spending. It comes in and it goes out to the people receiving the benefit. And it might not just be food stamps that are affected. There are going to be other government programs that get funding that may not have their funding released because there's been no appropriations, as things are currently shut down. Things like, money going out for food banks, et cetera, which people would turn to right now when they don't have access to their food stamps. But beyond the fact that there's been no appropriations bill and the government is shut down, so there'd be no money going out to those food banks. Beyond that, in the one big beautiful bill, they cut a bunch of money that would go toward food assistance programs like food banks. So even if they passed it, might not necessarily be those funds available for people that do need that kind of assistance. And the other talking point that may end up getting the Republicans to negotiate here on this government shutdown would be government pay or military pay specifically. Now, they were able to move money around and meet payroll for the last check. At least that's what Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth have said. Now, I'm hearing varying reports saying that yes, they were paid. Other people are saying, well, no, they really weren't because that isn't legal. Now, Democrats didn't do anything to prevent the military from getting paid this time by them moving money around. But in reality, Donald Trump does not have the authority to just unilaterally do that and unilaterally move funds like that. That should take the Congress and they should have to appropriate the funds out. But Donald Trump doesn't care, as we've talked about. He fashions himself to be a king, and he thinks, well, I told him to take care of it, so it's taken care of. It's either that or he is doing it to set somebody like Pete Hegseth up to be the fall guy, so that if it goes sideways and the military didn't get paid, or now if the next time if there's no more funds to move around and they don't get paid, he'll say, well, I told Hegseth to figure it out and make it happen. And well, he didn't. Oh, well, it's all him. It's not on me. Fire him, that kind of thing. Donald Trump stops short of ever taking accountability for anything else he ever does that goes wrong. And he wants you to figure out or to accept whoever he sets up as his scapegoat and to blame them for whatever happens. And how he still gets people to work around him is beyond me. When things go sideways, people like Pete Hegseth, RFK Jr., Linda McMahon, etc., he is going to scapegoat them. He's going to throw them under the bus to save his own hide or to make himself look better. So when it comes to things like, bombing these boats coming from Venezuela, I've heard we're now up to like 6 boats that have been bombed. He may end up trying to throw Rubio, the Secretary of State, or Pete Hegseth under the bus for it when public outcry comes against it and he starts looking bad. I mean, he already looks bad for doing it. And now we're hearing that there were a couple of survivors from one of the last attacks. And instead of them facing charges here in the United States for actually doing what they claim, which is smuggling drugs, we're hearing that they're getting sent back. They're going to be returned to Venezuela. Well, why would you do that? Maybe it's because you can't actually prove they were smuggling drugs and you don't want them in front of a U.S. judge who's going to be, asking questions and demanding answers. And you don't want them to get defense counsel where a good lawyer would be able to sit there and say, okay, where's your proof? Why didn't you just seize the boat? Why didn't you search it? Why didn't you wait for it to enter U.S. waters and follow normal protocol? Why are you bombing them in international waters and, violating a number of statutes and, both international laws and international agreements, etc., and just general U.S. policy. But they don't want to be in front of a judge. They don't want to have to explain themselves. So instead, the survivors get sent back. That is what this administration is trying to do. They are trying to hide the fact that they are doing things that are not necessarily legal. And they don't want to be held accountable for anything they're doing, especially in a court of law, where judges are constantly asking for proof and things like that are required. And their version of, well, just trust me, I know what I'm talking about, it ends up not being good enough. This administration has lost way more court cases than it's ever won. It loses a lot of things on appeals. And they are hoping ultimately to get a whole bunch of this stuff before the Supreme Court, hoping that this corrupt Supreme Court will rule in their favor. But even with as bad as this Supreme Court is, a lot of those cases I just think are pretty cut and dry, and that they would not overturn or change how some of this stuff is interpreted. And I say that as the Supreme Court has already overturned several long-standing precedents, including Roe v. Wade, including the Chevron doctrine. And if you're not familiar with what the Chevron doctrine is, there was a court case involving Chevron like 40, 45 years ago, where they said if the law was ambiguous with some of these government agencies, it deferred to the agency to fill in the gaps where Congress left, a gap there. And when they overturned it, what they were looking at was a case involving fishing boats and the EPA saying, well, there is a law that requires inspectors to make sure you're, only catching certain numbers and you're doing things a certain way. And the law is ambiguous a little bit about who has to pay for the inspectors. Well, one of the fishing boats or fishing companies sued and said, us having to pay for these inspectors like we have for the last how many years is crippling us. The law is ambiguous here, and we think the government should pay for it because they're the ones requiring it. And when the Supreme Court looked at it, they came back with and said, yeah, you know what? Law is ambiguous. Maybe we don't always defer to the agency to decide and fill in the gaps. Maybe we need to have the courts have a little more latitude in looking into what should be the appropriate response when it comes to filling in those gaps. And maybe Congress just needs to act and pass some laws and fill in the gaps themselves. So this Supreme Court, while it will overturn precedent, and it has in several cases, I think with some of the cases that this Supreme Court is going to be hearing, including things like they already heard oral arguments on the Voting Rights Act. We are waiting for that ruling. And they seem skeptical of the Voting Rights Act. They may end up striking it down, which would be unfortunate. However, depending on what they strike it down for or how they do it, it also gives a roadmap for Democrats to pass it again later around the way the Supreme Court strikes it down and what they could say to make it legal. But we shouldn't have to. This Supreme Court really shouldn't rule against the Voting Rights Act. There's no reason to vote against it. We can't just say, well, it's been 60 years or 60 years since we passed it. All racism's fixed. If the law is outdated because we don't need it anymore, then it doesn't do any harm to have on the books, because even if we're not doing the things that it says that it's preventing, what harm is it of having it to prevent people from trying to do those things and outlining punishments for making that attempt? But I just think this Supreme Court will ultimately end up having, on at least some of these cases, decide against the Trump administration, especially since we're not going to be getting some of the rulings until May, June, July of next year of the midterms, where with every day closer to those midterms, Donald Trump's power is actually getting weaker as public sentiment is turning against Donald Trump. There may be less incentive for them to actually stick their necks out and defend Donald Trump because his political power is waning. After the midterms, he may not have any political capital left. I've been talking about that. After the midterms, there might not be any reason for the Republicans to save Donald Trump. So if he costs them the House, he costs them the Senate, there may be enough sentiment within the Republican Party of saying, okay, we've got to rebrand, we've got to fix going into 2028. And they may decide to move on from Donald Trump, whether that means impeaching and removing, whether that means 25th Amendment or what have you. They may figure out a way to move past Donald Trump onto somebody else, which would be J.D. Vance for the short term. And we don't even know if J.D. Vance is going to be their candidate in 2028. And if he is still Donald Trump's vice president come 2028, he may be the person to run, only because they don't have anybody else that is willing to run against J.D. Vance, because they don't want to be held accountable for any of the problems of this current administration. All right, so that's everything I've got for you today. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me here on the Analytical Iowan podcast. I will be back tomorrow with another episode as we break down everything going into the next week, where we are still dealing with a government that is shut down, a government that's dysfunctional. We'll have more to talk about with Donald Trump and his reaction to the No Kings protests and everything to do with that. And I'm sure there's going to be some crazy stuff to talk about because with this administration, there always is. Thanks for listening.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.